You can't take this beer. I cannot finish.
My fellow citizens, good morning. It's Saturday, the 11th of July. It's been a long night with not much sleep for many of us, but we still felt it was worth the effort to get up at early enough to do this dialogue on the events of 10th July 2020. The numbers to bear in mind are, of course, 6 seats to the opposition against 87 to the PAP, and a vote share of 61.25 to the PAP. Neither the landslide of 2015 nor as bad as the slap in the face of 2011. So to make sense of these somewhat ambiguous results, I'm very, very happy to have on this Academia.SG panel a group of authors and editors of a forthcoming volume that will focus on GE2020. And we're going to jump right in, because I don't think the subject needs any introduction, and talk about what our panelists made of yesterday's results. Just so that nobody gets away with the wisdom of hindsight. I pinned our panelists down yesterday and asked them, what do you expect the results to be? And I forced a prediction out of each of them. And the predictions were for the PAP to win, but that they would lose 6 to 8 seats. So there was, in fact, a kind of an academic consensus among the 5 of us. We predicted the PAP would lose 6 to 8 seats with a 64 to 65% vote share. So talk about groupthink. There wasn't, in fact, much divergence in this particular group. As it turned out, the opposition ended up beating our expectations, not by much, but still significantly. So my first question really is, how big a surprise was this? Kevin, shall we start with you?
Thanks very much, Cherian. I think it was a surprise only insofar as if you look at this set of results versus what happened in 2015, right? So 2015 was an extraordinary election when they actually gained a large number of votes, something like 7% or 8% more than what they did prior to that in 2011. So if one looks at the trajectory from 2011 to today, actually we shouldn't be surprised. Of course, there are the usual points that have been made about flight to safety, for example, whether or not people would run back to the PAP as they and vote for them in the way that they did in 2015. So yes, it was a kind of a surprise, but not so much if one took a dispassionate look and looked at the trends that were emerging already from 2011.
Yeah. Cherian, your mic. Cherian.
You're muted.
Priscilla, how about you?
Thanks so much, Cherian. I think likewise, for me, it was quite a surprise, and I think a few surprising trends stood out for me. There's the swing to Sengkang to the WP. The general swing towards the opposition, you're looking about 5 to maybe 8%. And when the results started coming in, it really felt like GE 2011 feelings came back again. So I think at the start of polling day, there was quite a lot of nervousness as to how the opposition would fare. I think with this election, it is truly unprecedented. COVID is unexpected. There are a lot of certainties surrounding these elections. So I guess the question now is 2011, we saw the swing to the opposition, 2015 back to the PAP, today another swing to the opposition. So what the trajectory might mean for the opposition, for the PAP moving forward in the next decade.
Terence.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Cherian, for hosting this and sharing this. I'll pick up from Kevin's comment about the surprise. Definitely, I think by and large, most Singaporeans were surprised by the outcome. The nature of the surprise, however, is a bit different from 2011. Kevin and myself has had the privilege of working on 2 books prior to this, 2011 and 2015. And I think the term back in 2011 was the new normal, right? Everyone was talking about how this was a watershed election. What we're seeing is a continuation of that, what happened back in 2011, minus, I think importantly, minus palpable anger amongst the voters. Perhaps there was anger within, but we couldn't feel the pulse because of the way this election was run. This COVID-19 election. My suspicion is that people are starting to think a bit more about what they want out of the government, and by the government I also mean the opposition on the other side. So I think we're, in that regard, we should not be surprised, but nevertheless, because of the inability to gauge what was going to happen, I think there was surprises all around.
Before I turn to you, Elvin, I should point out that I've received a number of extremely stern messages that I actually got the numbers wrong in my introduction. It's all a haze to me because I really am half asleep. Apparently, I stole seats from the opposition, so please forgive me. It was, of course, 10 seats fell to the opposition, which means 83 seats to the PAP. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, I see vigorous nods, including from our political scientist, Elvin Ong, who will next give us his views and maybe expand on what some of these numbers mean.
Yeah, I think definitely it was a surprise result that for all of us. And I think particularly with regards to Sengkang, I think if you ask most people before the elections, if they would take a bet whether PAP will win Sengkang or not, I think most people will bet the PAP winning Sengkang. So the WP's winning Sengkang with 52% of the votes is quite impressive and definitely a surprise. I would like to also add on to Terence's comment about being unable to feel the palpable anger on the ground, which was quite evident in the 2011 general elections. I think in this general elections, it appears to me that there's definitely not so much of anger, but more of frustration, right? And the frustration being that voters really looking forward to debating about policies, how to move forward beyond the post-COVID future, and looking to have more inclusivity in terms of the different viewpoints where policy debates were happening. But what happened during the campaign was that there were a lot of, still a lot of personality attacks and some would say character assassinations both ways, right? So my sense is that a lot of voters were very frustrated with the entire campaign. People were disappointed at how the campaign turned out. So that was much more palpable, at least online, as compared to anger in 2011.
Okay, you raised a very important point about the negativity in the campaign, which was a key theme that was brought up by those who registered for this webinar in their registration form. So we do want to spend a bit of more time about that. But sticking to the specific Sengkang race, I should say that although our predictions yesterday were pretty close to the eventual outcome, yeah. We predicted 6 to 8 seats falling to the opposition. None of us predicted a wipeout. All of us predicted that the Workers' Party would keep its seats. The only question is whether it would add a few more. And in all humility, as Elvin said, not one of the 5 of us said that Sengkang would fall. Yeah, so this was a surprise to us. It may not have been a big surprise to many people in the audience, but it was a surprise to us. So I think it will take some time to figure out what exactly happened in that GRC. I wonder if any of you have some preliminary thoughts. Priscilla, for example.
Yeah, maybe I'll just jump into kind of I think Sengkang for me is very interesting because this is my ward and I have been voting since 2011 in this ward. So I think it's still a bit early to kind of figure out what's happened in Sengkang, but I think what is interesting is to look historically how Sengkang and that area has voted. So if we look at Sengkang GRC as it stands now, it encompasses quite a bit of former Sengkang West GRC, Punggol East SMC, and a bit of Pasir Ris Punggol GRC. And I say this area is a little under the radar, but has been quite a stronghold for WP. Because if we look at the 2015 results, against the national swing, you are looking at Punggol East having about 48%, and then you are also looking at Sengkang West SMC at about 38% to the WP, and even higher in the 2011 elections. So you do have you do see that the WP is a very familiar branding here in Sengkang Punggol East area, and of course Sengkang is a relatively young constituency compared to many others who might fit the type of profiles or the target audiences, or might align themselves more with the WP candidates, which are who are younger and quite representative of the constituency here in Sengkang. So perhaps moving ahead, I think perhaps the WP will be looking to try to consolidate and build their regional identity here in Sengkang. And I think and of course, it's not going to be a guarantee that they will continue to hold Sengkang GRC, especially when we saw what happened with Punggol East. So I think a lot remains to be seen and determined.
Kevin?
Yes, thanks, Cherian. To be fair to all of us, I think everyone did predict that Sengkang would be a close fight. None of us predicted that they would win Sengkang, but everyone said it would be a fight to watch. And let me explain why I think this is important in sort of structural terms. Whenever you create a new constituency, there is always a danger that this constituency would adopt a new identity of its own, even though it may have been made out of composite parts of various old constituencies before. So I want to make a couple of points relating to this. One, which is the drawing of electoral boundaries. One tendency has always been that in the drawing of electoral boundary lines, those wards that did not fare too well with the PAP in that particular election tend to be either absorbed, redrawn, or somehow reconfigured. And this represents, well, one could say, well, you're gerrymandering, so you kind of want to dissipate the dissent. That's one way of looking at it. But you also create something new, which doesn't then have the baggage of the old. So when you send a new team there, you're actually, if you were the opposition, you are actually on a far more level playing field than a team that's been there as an incumbent. Now, we can see the power of incumbency, for example, in Hougang, SMC, in Aljunied, right? If you don't touch those boundaries too much, incumbency has its great advantages. But the moment you create a new constituency, a new identity emerges, and then it depends on how you play your cards. And I think we shouldn't take away the fact that the Workers' Party played a brilliant strategy insofar as Sengkang is concerned, right? New, younger electorate, probably better educated than in some of the older estates, much more savvy, understand the nuances of government. They do understand the difference between what the national government does on the one hand and what municipal government does on the other hand. So if you go out there and you say, I'm going to give you a playground, and thanks to us, you're going to have a road here, I think people have sort of realized that, hey, come on, there is a national plan. It's not just a Sengkang plan. It's a national plan. There are roads, there are MRTs, there are HDB flats and commercial spaces and so on. So you can't really take too much credit for that. So if you keep barking up that tree, people are going to say, yeah. And then, and the Workers' Party supplied that, and then, right? And they had a brilliant campaign, young candidates immediately trying to dovetail their own identities with that of the young parents, young families who live in Sengkang, and then sort of connected at that level. So I think that made some difference.
That's helpful because I think it identifies some of the sort of the structural issues at play in a ward like Sengkang, as well as some of the X factor particularities of this particular contest, which I think is a good way to look at any contest. I wonder if any of you would like to elaborate on this mix of underlying secular tendencies versus what's really new in the campaign, with particular reference to Sengkang for a start. I mean, I think if I could just venture one fairly obvious point, it would be that the electorate seems to be looking for the sweet spot, right? What is the right amount of opposition that will provide a check on the PAP? Uncomfortable with too much, uncomfortable with too little, and the precise number of votes in any one constituency seems to be affected, according to several scholars, primarily by perceived credibility, for example. I mean, would that be a crude but generally accurate summary of the literature out there on voting patterns, Elvin?
Yeah, so maybe here I can answer the question more specifically. With regards to the general voting population, I would say, and also maybe in particular with Sengkang, one can sort of characterize the moderate median voter in Singapore having the political preference of, number one, they want the PAP to still be in power, but number two, they would like to see more opposition voices uh, to potentially challenge the PAP much more in parliament, right? So that is some sort of a moderate median voter. Now the question then is, when it comes to the local opposition party that is contesting in the district, then these moderate median voters will have to think very hard about whether to vote for the particular opposition party in that candidate or not. In their constituency or not. And as Cherian, you mentioned, the academic literature out there has suggested that party credibility is a very important factor as compared to other important factors in driving opposition vote share, right? So party credibility is this perceived notion that opposition parties will be able to, number one, manage the town council effectively, professionally, if they do get into power. And number two, to be able to also exhibit professionalism in credibility in challenging the PAP in parliament and maybe not make a fool of themselves, right? And people infer these party credibility from a wide range of indicators. They look at who the leader of the party is, they look at the consistency of the grassroots outreach, and they look at the consistency of the party brand, whether they have a consistent messaging or not. And reflective of this sense of party credibility, I did a little calculation of the vote shares of the three major opposition parties in their constituencies that they contested in. So Workers' Party vote share, PSP vote share, and SDP vote share. And obviously, Workers' Party vote share in all the areas that it contested was the best. So their vote share was 49.5%, if my calculations are correct, right? So that includes East Coast and Marine Parade and Punggol West, which they lost, right? So 49.5%, so almost 50% for the Workers' Party vote share. And the second best, surprisingly, is PSP, right? PSP in all the places it contested was 40.8% vote share, right? So what Tan Ching Bok mentioned yesterday was correct, that their vote share in all the places was around 40%. And surprisingly, coming in third place was SDP. Their vote share, in the constituencies that they contested in was 37%, right? So it's quite surprising that PSP managed to do better than SDP, given that SDP has a long reputation as an opposition party. But I guess the PSP credibility was definitely boosted with Dr. Tan Ching Bok. So I think overall, people are definitely looking at party credibility from a wide range of indicators, but particularly with regards to, say, Sengkang winning, I think that has to do a little bit more of the local dynamics, as Kevin mentioned. Kevin mentioned. Yeah.
Well, the contrast between SDP and PSP that you mentioned is interesting. How quickly PSP has come up. But I suppose one other way to look at it is that they're actually going after a different set of voters, right? That the PSP would, you would assume, be most attractive to the swing voter who has previously voted for the PAP, which in fact would not be the kind of the profile of the SDP supporter or the group that the SDP courts. Yeah. That is something, I guess, that would need to we need to look at more closely.
Well, very quickly, the SDP might, I would say the typical SDP voter might not be the typical PSP voter, but in terms of who they are trying to attract, I think my sense is that they are both trying to attract the same kind of moderate median voter. They want to be able to persuade people who have previously voted for the PAP to vote for them instead in order to win, right, a majority. So it's always about that voter that gives you the 50th, 51st, 52nd percent in your constituency. So I think all parties are trying to get at that median voter, but it's of course the typical stereotype of the PSP voter and the SDP voter may not be the same.
Actually, one of the things that I observed from way back in the 2011 election is that, you know, in a place where politics is not terribly ideological, you don't have parties that are, you know, from really diverse ideological camps. You're actually fighting for a very, very tiny sliver of the center. The center is not as wide as it would be. So you know that on either end of the spectrum, there will be 25% hardcore pro-PAP, 25% hardcore anti-PAP, and then there's sort of a middle vote. But that middle, ideologically, that middle is a lot narrower than the numbers suggest, right? So what that middle moderate, as Elvin put it, what are they actually looking for? And this is beginning to look very interesting, because you see now almost the emergence of a two-party system, which is what the Westminster system was designed to be, right? Where your choices are not so stark, where you actually look at the other side and say, well, it's a party that is credible like me, it is as capable as I am, they are not so ideological different that are, you know, I could switch. I could actually cross the floor for that party. I actually can identify with that party. So the greatest success that the PAP has had in all these 60 years has actually been implanting into the Singaporean mindset that they are looking for a PAP-like party, a party that espouses those values that PAP stood for. It is really interesting for me to see in this election, you know, almost every opposition party quoting lines from Lee Kuan Yew. I mean, he's become almost like a godfather even for the opposition, right? And let's not even talk about the Lee Hsien Yang factor. But, you know, what is it that political parties aspire to do? It is because they see this connection with a particular idealistic version of what party politics should be.
Can I jump in here? I was just thinking along the same lines as Kevin, because we talked about Sengkang, you know, appealing to the young voters, having, you know, the MPs themselves, the elected MPs themselves, rather synonymous in terms of, you know, where they're at in this, at their phase of life. But I think also there is that broader, for want of a better word, pragmatism. And we talk about Lee Kuan Yew's brand of pragmatism that's been ingrained on Singaporeans, including those who have left the shores, such as myself. I think the pragmatism comes into play here because they see where they want the future of Singapore to go. So it's not just about the immediate present moment, because the immediate present moment can be appealed with, you know, upgrading and the playgrounds that Kevin talked about as well. So I think that there's the element of that, you know, beyond the constituency itself, that has swung those middle ground voters. And I would say that, you know, their ideology is entirely pragmatic. In other words, they can go either slightly left or slightly right, or stay exactly central, right? Exactly centrist. So it's, I think we cannot discount those sorts of mentalities amongst the voters.
Terence, I want to stick with you because one of the most interesting features of this election was, of course, the fact that it was more media reliant than any election in history.
Yes.
Yeah, and a number of our audience members have asked us questions about this, ranging from questions about the mainstream media. So Rasandran points out that, you know, modern elected democracies need diverse newspapers and publications that allow unfettered constructive analysis. How can this be sustained? Another viewer asks, how can the opposition spread its word out effectively in this election? And makes the good point that you know, that many of us in fact rely on WhatsApp, Facebook groups, when we talk about social media communication. But that, of course, only preaches to the converted, we think. Yeah, maybe it doesn't, but it seems to make sense that it's actually not the ideal medium for the opposition parties to reach out to the middle ground, so to speak. And of course, it's heavy reliance on social media. This is not the first internet election. It's not even the first social media.
No.
The first YouTube election, but yet it feels different, doesn't it? So what do you make of that, Terence?
Look, there's so much to analyze. We can keep doing it until the next election and beyond. But you're right, Cherian, in terms of calling this an internet election. I think back in 2006, the term was already thrown out. This is the internet election, right? And then again, 2011, again, 2015. I think you could say that the use of the internet, social media has reached a point where, it's widespread. There's beyond critical mass now. What's ironic about this particular election is that because it's the pandemic election, the amendment to the Election Act to allow this election to happen has pointed everyone to the internet. And as a result, we've had the ability to bypass mainstream media. My suggestion is that most people still read mainstream media when it comes to an election, but the information is balanced by whether it's rumor mongering or whether it's the sharing of new information, the sharing of videos by opposition. In fact, just last night or this morning alone, many of us would have received videos of people celebrating on the ground. And of course, everyone became a safe distancing ambassador, pointing out that no one's observing safe distancing. Look, all of those things seem very frivolous, but I think they inform the voters of the broader sense of what each party stands for. Now, whether that aligns exactly with their message is another story, but I think people use that to think about who they want to support, who they want to lean towards, and those sorts of things. So yes, we are seeing a shift. It's become more messy, but I think in any society where you have a freer media, the messiness will always be there. And I think that forms part of the broader equation. So, early stages, this is the morning after. I think there's quite a bit to digest and quite a bit of statistics to see through.
I'd like to jump in by just mentioning that as I talk to various voters, various fellow analysts and various political parties in their use of social media in these elections, I think there is a gradual growing sense of a general divide, a generational divide, with regards to the different kinds of platforms that different age groups use. So even within this broad category of internet and social media, there's variation across different kinds of platforms, right? So number one, we could see that people in their 30s and 40s, they will generally gravitate towards Facebook as the medium that they would use to communicate with each other. But people in their teens and 20s would gravitate towards using Twitter and using Instagram to express their political opinions and preferences, right? So I think there was a sense that Tan Cheng Bock managed to create this persona of being a very cute grandfather because of the way he engaged in like describing hype beast to his fellow voters on Instagram, right? So I think that definitely is a generational divide, and what this implies moving forwards into the future will be very interesting to observe, and so I can't really say anything for now. No, very little research has been done on this generational divide.
The generational divide, I think, deserves further discussion later on in our on our panel. But I'll stick with social media specifically. I agree completely with you. As a media scholar myself, it's with some shame that I admit that my field hasn't actually gotten on top of this in Singapore, right? That there's much more research being done, even in our neighboring countries, about social media in elections and about social media in Singapore. And let's hope that we catch up quickly, because obviously this is a major development. For example, one thing we don't really know, but we have some sense of, is that it is not really the case anymore that the internet belongs to anti-government forces. Far from it. Yeah, for several years, the PAP and the government and its supporters have invested heavily in social media capacity. And in fact, to me, the surprise was the opposite. I was actually expecting social media to be far more dominated by pro-PAP forces in this campaign. And I'm still trying to think about why it wasn't. Because if you look at the period between elections, I think it is fair to say that the PAP has already won the social media battle. So, but why wasn't it? Why didn't it clinch the deal, so to speak, within the campaign? I mean, I can only one theory brought up by someone online. I think one of the people who sent out a question yesterday was that well, it could be anything from the fact that the opposition is just more creative online. It could be that the PAP are not actually doing it correctly. I think, Priscilla, you had some thoughts on that maybe the kind of internet brigades that dominate the between election period may not be the kind of thing that works during the campaign.
Yeah, so I think I'll just make 2 points. I think the first is that the opportunities and the advantages that social media can bring is only as good as as whichever party is most capable of able to seize that opportunity to its own advantage. So I think in terms of the opposition, if you look at opposition parties who have ran very good social media campaigns, they have a relatively high voting share. So I think the ability to seize that media space to a party's own advantage is critical. And I think the second point is that with social media, what you do see is that the narrative is no longer dominated by one or two state actors. You see many different non-state actors coming into the scene. I mean, the PAP Internet Brigade, one of them, but you also see a lot of people, a lot of different people whom you don't expect to be political, but have also chimed in. Social media influencers, a lot of them have been actively speaking about this election and on the things that matter. So that narrative now is more diverse and more plural, and it'll be interesting to see how this will develop.
But Priscilla, sticking with you, I just want to check my hunch, because of course one of the things that makes social media research so difficult is that in effect we're all looking at different internets, right? Because of micro-targeting, because of the way we create our own bubbles. And my Facebook is different from your Facebook. Of course, you're too young to be on Facebook in the first place, but still, right? But what is your hunch? I mean, is my hunch correct that the anti-PAP forces and the neutral forces did in fact hold their own, or if anything, surpass the PAP social media campaign, despite the fairly obvious fact that there is far more money behind the PAP's online campaign? Would that be a correct hunch that there was only so much that money could do?
I think potentially, in the sense that you see, and my reference point is really with a lot of different social media influencers. They don't have the type of money or resources when it comes to dealing specifically with election type issue, but you see their views being extremely widespread. People are sharing it on a very extensive basis. So I mean, it's really hard to tell now also, because there are, I suppose we will be able to make that comparison more if we had Facebook pages that are pro-PAP, for example, fabrications if they are allowed, and if they had that space to also post on their Facebook page, then you get a better sense also of being able to see the comments, what people are sharing. So in the absence of that, I think the reality is more nuanced.
I kind of hesitate jumping in at this point in the midst of two media scholars, but the thing with media is very simple. It's about messaging and how targeted and how efficient and effective the messaging is. So you can have a lot of money, you can have many platforms, but if your messaging is not clear, if you don't know what you're doing, or you're trying to do too many things, right? You're trying to put out too many messages, and social media is such that, given the very short attention span that people have when looking at social media, you have to be very good and very targeted and to able to evoke those particular images or those particular emotions in a given time. So so it all depends on how well your media campaign has actually been orchestrated. You don't need a whole lot. I mean, you know, I thought, like, putting out video clips. I particularly like the one that Workers' Party put out with the couple, Terence Tan and Hurting Ru, right? So there wasn't very much by way of this is Workers' Party message and so on and so forth, but it evokes a particular message. It tells you that, hey, we are like you, we are young parents, we have the same challenges, we got young kids, we are sandwiched like you, and we are still trying to do this, right? And there was this line, I think, that Terence quipped, where he says, "Ah, yeah, bo pian, you join opposition in Singapore, nobody wants to marry you." I mean, it gives you a number of layers, a number of messages in a very short time, and in a not offensive way. It's not in your face, like I'm hectoring you, I'm telling you, I'm showing you how great I am. No, it's nothing like that. I'm actually being able to evoke a sense of identity with you, empathy with you, and sort of drawing your emotions hopefully towards me as well. So this is effective campaigning, effective media strategy. Nothing to do with how much money or special effects or whatever, right?
I think sorry, I'll just chime in very quickly. I think the word I had in mind is authenticity, or even perceived authenticity, in the case of for election campaigning purposes.
Yeah, I agree 100%, Terence. So, I mean, I don't know about everyone, but from my point of view, the videos and basically, I try to do a little bit of social media research myself, and the content that the Workers' Party produced evoked much more of a sense of authenticity within the candidates to show to people, like, this is how they are and this is just who they are, right? And they don't just repeat talking points that they are already trying to say, right? Okay, they don't go around just repeating no blank check. They show you who their lives, what their lives are, how their journey, and you as Kevin mentioned, you feel empathetic with them, and you get a sense of like who they are as a people. In contrast, with the content that the PAP produced, you get a sense that they are repeating certain talking points, right? It's our lives, our jobs, our future. It's our lives, our jobs, our future, and there wasn't much beyond that messaging. And even for example, like, the 4G leaders, and particularly DPM Heng Swee Keat, from all the content produced, I didn't really get a sense of like who DPM Heng Swee Keat was as a person. Like, who is he? How is his life experience inform him as a person? I didn't get a sense of who the authentic Heng Swee Keat was, right? So that was just my sense of judging from the content that was produced.
thank you for that, because you reminded me of the start of the campaign. In fact, prior to even the campaigning starting, when the PAP new candidates were being introduced, and there was a video that went around social media that talked about how chum all these people's lives were, that contrived humility, if you like, contrived humble background, and in some ways we've had enough of that. You know, one of the things I pinpointed to Chan Chun Singh's the decision not to anoint him as a successor. It was about a year and a half back, right? And so I made the comment to one of the media outlets that, you know, he's mentioning about his over-valorizing his humble background one too many times. I think many Singaporeans are quite sick of that narrative now. So to continue to harp on that by the PAP already started the campaign on an awful note. So
yeah, it was interesting to me to see
back to the authenticity question. Yeah,
that's right. It was. I mean, I was fascinated to see how quickly the humility narrative backfired. Yeah, how quickly netizens saw through it. How quickly they were able to detect, correctly or wrongly, the lack of authenticity or perceived authenticity.
oh, that's right. Sorry.
And again, that gets me thinking. You know, wait, why did it happen so suddenly? And it's, but my hunch again is that the PAP is unused to this kind of pushback because it doesn't normally get it in between elections, when the truth is most Singaporeans are just turned off and apathetic and not particularly paying attention and not really even bothering to respond to PAP propaganda. So if I were to hazard a guess, I'd say that a lot of what the PAP thinks works between elections, it is only getting away with it because not that many people are paying attention or even bothering to contradict them. But then, of course, in election season, everyone is turned on in a very motivated way. And this takes the PAP by surprise because stuff that may have worked, you know, even just 6 months ago, suddenly doesn't work during the campaign. And I feel that they were not prepared for that. But sticking with this, this very important idea that Priscilla raised, you know, which is that, look, you know, no amount of social media is going to make up for lack of substance in the end, right? Can we spend a bit of time moving away from image and talking about the substance of the message? You know, what worked for the WP in particular, and what didn't work for the PAP? Elvin, do you wanna take that? I mean, the substantive calls that both sides were making were pretty clear. I mean, the PAP did have a strong substantive message. So did the WP, so did the SDP, and so on. They didn't work equally well.
Yeah, I think if you look in terms of the substantive policies that the WP proposed, right, I would say I would refer back to Minister Vivian Balakrishnan's comment that WP's policies basically took the policy proposals of the PAP and moved half a step to the left. Actually, I think half a step is too little. They actually took one huge step to the left, right? And the very fact that many voters voted for WP and especially those in Sengkang also voted for WP. To some extent, it was also that the WP's message, substantive policy proposals actually resonated with voters themselves. And here I would point to potentially a couple of key proposals which WP made, which is number one, maybe the minimum wage proposal that WP made, right? So the PAP has always said that, you know, the progressive wage model works for us and that is what we should go for. But the WP has consistently also said that, yes, that is good, but we also need to add in this minimum wage, right, to have that baseline for everyone else. So I think a lot of people saw that as an important thing because that kind of is a signal of the inherent dignity and inherent dignity of labor in Singapore, right? That you are not an exploited, undervalued labor for your work. So that sets like a kind of minimum bar. Of course, there were other proposals that WP had, such as the redundancy insurance, again, which the PAP has consistently said they are not interested in implementing, but the WP has consistently said that this is something that will be good to have, right? So in terms of substantive policy proposals wise, I can definitely see that the WP's left step proposal definitely resonated a lot more than the PAP's.
Yeah, one thing that didn't work for me in terms of this half step, what was meant to be an insult, was that actually, to me, it kind of backfired because, if the PAP is saying that the WP's ideas are just a half step away, implying that they're actually quite easy to implement, then my question would be, why isn't the PAP implementing them? I mean, it suggests that, in fact, the WP and people who support the WP are not asking for that much. So what's stopping you, right? So that didn't quite work for me. Priscilla, anything to add on substantive areas of policy?
I think for me, what really stood out for the WP was their ability to tell a good story and a good narrative. The policies mattered, but the values of each candidate and how the party values and how that translated into policies mattered. People cared that they stood for inclusive growth. They want to take care of every single person so that no one is left behind. And I think as much as the policies mattered, the ability to show where they stand, what they stood for, was very critical. And I think if we contrast that to the PAP, the manner in which they introduce their new candidate seems to also be not authentic, as what Elvin mentioned as well. And it was also, like what Terence said, a race to the bottom as to who came from a more poor circumstances than the other. And then you leave voters kind of hanging. So, okay, where do you stand? What do you stand for? How are you going to work for my benefit? How can I resonate with you? So I think that was the big contrast for me, and why I think WP really did excellent in this social media internet election.
Pick up on that point as well. I mean, I thought it was very striking that Sylvia's final party political broadcast was so focused on the values that Priscilla is talking about. And it wasn't the traditional bread and butter issues that we associate with the Workers' Party, very much about the society we yearn for and so on. Language that we don't quite associate with, this working class bread and butter party. Kevin, anything to jump in on that?
Yes, I wanted to just make the point that one of the major disadvantages that the PAP had in terms of messaging was that there was already too much of it. When you had the whole lockdown, when everybody had really nothing else to do or could not do anything else, and you were focused on news, going online and looking and reading at stuff, I mean, they are saturated with the PAP's message, right? Jobs, livelihood, our future, COVID-19. So you have, in other words, they heard it all, and that's all coming from the government. So when you call an election in the middle of a pandemic, and people are worried, they say, well, you're going to call this now. You better tell me something more, right? It's got to be more. And all you're doing is you're saying the same thing. Give me a mandate to do what I'm already doing. So after a while, people tune out, right? Because I'm not hearing anything new. So no matter what you pile onto the equation, no matter how poor your background used to be, or illustrious your career is the same story, right? The Workers' Party offered a different story. And it was a story that was not ridiculous. Okay, in other words, yes, people want to hear alternative views, but I mean, and here I'm going back to really ancient times in the last century, where you had politicians like Haban Singh, for example, who at one time in his election campaign said, if I am elected Prime Minister of Singapore, I will abolish national service and I will make, bus fares 5 cents no matter how far you go. I mean, you make election promises like that, no way you could keep them, right? Workers' Party came out with something, and that's why that half step, one step thing was really important, because in that economic debate, I mean, James made a point. We've done the sums. There will be trade-off, but we can afford this. And this is what Singaporeans want to hear. Now, that's what we do with our budgets. We juggle all the time. We say, well, look, maybe this year, right, because of these circumstances, uncertainty, let's put aside a bit more. We don't go for a holiday. We don't buy that new fridge or whatever it is. That's what we do on a normal basis. And so the Workers' Party was able to tap into that and say, well, we're not throwing out the silver. We are just juggling things a bit to make it manageable, and it's more humane. It's more idealistic. This is more the kind of, kinder society that you and I want.
But, to put what you have said in another way, Kevin, actually, it is similar to the frustration that the PAP has often expressed, that, look, they do the hard work in between elections, and of course that involves communication. And then these Johnny-come-latelys with their very novel message comes in and surprises us. And really all that's impressive about them is that they sound fresh and novel. And why are our voters so seduced by novelty? Shouldn't they be going for the tried and true message, as even if it's boring, right? Even if the only twist that you can come up with on jobs is to repeat it, say jobs, 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 right? But it is, but that's still an important message. Is it really to the WP's credit that they are merely novel? I'm going to just leave that aside as a comment, right? But I think more interesting to me when it comes to the PAP's battle with the Workers' Party is how come the town council stuff didn't stick. I mean, this was such a major accusation made against the Workers' Party. Huge resources were invested, state resources, media resources, into making the claim that the Workers' Party simply cannot be trusted. And yet it was a virtual non-issue in this campaign. What's going on with that? Priscilla?
I was also quite surprised that the town council issue was not raised so much during this campaigning period. I think one potential reason might be the way the WP has been able to frame and message its responses to this, that they have been given the green band in corporate governance by the MMD, and that is a hard fact. That is persuasive. It is an objective evidence as to their ability to manage the town council, and I think maybe that was it was difficult to counter that narrative.
In contrast, I don't know whether you agree with this, Elvin. I mean, the mud that has been thrown at Chee Soon-Juan seems to have stuck. Although he did a lot better this time than in previous rounds. Is he finally getting rid of that virtually 20-year-old stigma?
Whether Dr. Chee is finally getting rid of the 20-year-old labels that the PAP has thrown at him, it's quite speculative. I'm not really sure. But I would say that it seems that in general, the SDP still has a kind of a image problem in terms of its branding, right? Whether it comes across as being a little bit too aggressive in criticizing the PAP relative to the Workers' Party, that may be it. Because if you take a look at the vote share, again, as I mentioned, out of PSP, WP, and SDP, the SDP seem to have fared the worst. right, with regards to competing against the PAP. And also, if it's not about Chee Soon-juan, we could maybe perhaps have seen, sorry, let me rephrase it again. If the SDP's party branding were to be a little bit better, then perhaps we could have seen Professor Paul Tambia being elected, right, in Bukit Panjang. But the fact is he did not, he was not elected, right? So I think before the elections, most of us were saying, well, if there was to be one more or two more seats for the opposition, that it may come in Bukit Panjang, because Professor Paul Tambia is such a well-respected doctor, right? So it goes to show again that when people want to vote for the opposition party in their constituencies, it's a combination of all factors, right? It's not just any one single factor. Your party brand must be good, your candidate must be good, and they must be authentic and compelling. So it is really difficult for the opposition parties to have all their ducks lined up in a row and say, I have this, I have A, B, C, D, E, whatever you want, I have it. And therefore, this is why you should vote for me, right? You miss out on any one crucial ingredient, like party branding for the SDP, so you might not be able to recover from it, right? So that's how I see SDP's performance.
Well, speaking of mud, I guess the main victim of negative campaigning in this election was Raisa Khan. Yeah, I was thinking, I wonder if Ivan Lim would also qualify, but it wasn't eventually a candidate, let's put it this way, among all the candidates.
He was featured though. Did people see?
Paid the biggest price reputationally, although it ultimately didn't work at the polls. I think that does deserve some discussion. Who would like to go first?
Sorry, I was just chiming in. I apologize for that. I was just saying that Ivan Lim featured in the victory comments that Taman made, right, last night or this morning. I thought that was a bit of a surprise. I don't know what they have up their sleeves in regards to Ivan Lim, but I think we want to forget him, but they keep bringing him back into the frame. So this is a bit strange, I think, on the part of the PAP. Look, I think you hit the nail on the head, Cherian. I think my sense when Raisa was rather brutally attacked was that, or immediately, firstly, you kind of go, oh no, this is not good. And then I realized I've encountered her before because she was a student here at Murdoch, and in fact was the guild president in 2015. So I have encountered her. I just don't know those encounters. But I also felt that they've made the wrong move already very early on, because the attack on her brought out the minority issues that they were not ready to confront. So I think immediately in one fell swoop, you have people remembering the Halima Yaakob presidency issue that was forced upon Singaporeans, you could say. Immediately, you also...
Because of who her father is, you mean?
But yes, that's right. That's right. So the links, got closer than you would otherwise like. So in some ways, it was not a clever move on the part of the PAP. And I think it also brought up the big issues. Remember, we talked about the micro as well as the mega, the broader issues. It brought up issues of the politics of race, which I think Singapore has not dealt with, all these years in talking about race and ruling out race. You've actually brought it up to the fore much more. And that was really not clever campaigning by. So then, of course, that sparked, it kept being on the radar because it sparked this whole slew of police reports, right? Which was funny in some ways, but it also brings the whole process of politics down to, if there's a word beyond gutters, that would be it. So it became extremely ugly. And I don't think any Singaporean rationally or even irrationally would like any of these things to be part of the whole equation.
Yeah, can I jump in here? You see, one of these problems with character assassination, you start attacking somebody, is that I think that's something from an old PAP playbook from the last century. You may be able to get away with this, right? I mean, I remember the days when Lee Kuan Yew would attack somebody because, you know, his father was a bicycle thief, right? Or something like that. You don't do that these days because, number one, you know, I think people would look at the individual and go beyond, and then try and see if there were other reasons why this particular person worked in a particular way. Now, I think one of the problems that everybody faced in this election, and actually boomeranged on the government, was that you instituted POFMA. You have a number of rules that are in play that seem to be too convenient to use to silence your opponents. Okay, I mean, I was totally mystified by the correction order issued, you know, on Paul Tambaya and the NUSS and all the people who sort of reported on that event where he talked about what the MOM said. Everybody remembers what MOM said. It was there. It was there in the Straits Times. I mean, you know, and yet, you know, you see that in play. So after a while, again, if you do this too much, then either it descends into this abyss, which nobody wants to go, and after a while, people sort of get desensitized and don't want to look at that, and therefore negates the effect of the attack, right? Or you or you simply ignore it and say, well, okay, look, we're not going to look at that. We'll look beyond. So I think any party, any internet actor wishing to make sort of this ad hominem personal attacks has to be very, very careful, because the danger of it boomeranging, as it did the person who reported on Raisa, happened, right? They actually it may actually come back and hit you.
I would like to also add in to contribute my 2 cents on the significance of Raisa being now an elected member of parliament, right? So the very fact that Sengkang voters voted her and her team in, despite the mud that was thrown at her to stain her, seems to me like a real significant indictment of the government's management of race and religious issues in the country, particularly one could say amongst the younger voters, right? And younger voters are kind of saying that, you know, this is not how we want to work on race and religious issues moving forward into the future. And they are going to stand by the candidate, and we can see for ourselves why she may or may not be credible, right? And I also want to doubly emphasize her position as now an elected member of parliament. I could be wrong, right? But now she is the first ever elected opposition member of parliament who is both female and Malay, right? And that is fairly significant for the Workers' Party, where you have someone who is young, Malay lady, for young people to look up to, for people within potentially the minority community to look up to. So a lot of eyes will be on her, on how she carries herself in Parliament. Although, of course, we shouldn't say any one person is representative of the community. Right? I'm not saying that at all, but I'm saying that in terms of potentially being a role model for the community, of course, nobody wants to have that kind of label thrown on them, but the potential effect may be that people will be looking towards her as a kind of a role model moving forwards into the future. So I think her election as an elected member of parliament has a huge implication for the racial minorities in Singapore.
can I just maybe just quickly jump in? I think what Riza's incident show is that, for me, really, the dominant party no longer shapes the narrative, and the narrative will be shaped in the next few years and now by ordinary people who are able who wants to take part in this conversation, who want to talk about race and religion. They have very different views from, or the younger generation, they have very different views about race and religion from older generation. And it will be challenging, it will be messy, but I think from the looks of how so much discussion on social media have originated a lot from young people, that this ability to be able to talk about race is top priority. And I think for me also, what was interesting is the police report. They are, and you after her incident, you saw many other individual citizens also filing police reports against Mr. Heng, the PAP.
So we need to
on this
ask which
incident.
police report you're referring to.
or rather, I'm just probably just as a general observation, how so many police reports have kind of sprung up as a result of this incident. I think for me that was really interesting, because it felt to me like people wanted to equalize the use of the law, that it should be equally applied a particular single or a particular person. So I think that for me was quite interesting to see how people are using state mechanism to perhaps have some form of accountability.
That's interesting. So yeah, I think the tactic of using police reports, I think, has rightly been criticized. It's like, do we really want a society where citizens can't sort things out by themselves and instead going to run to the police and everything? But you're making this a point that, in fact, it is being used to send a message. We expect equal treatment. We're going to give as good as we get. Yeah. And it's in a way, it's setting a norm of equality in perhaps an ugly way, but people should get that message that Singaporeans demand fairness and equality. Kevin, going back to this question of the police report made against her, someone was asking me, wait, what's to say that now that she's about to enter into Parliament, she could actually be charged and convicted? Is that a realistic prospect?
Well, again, investigations are ongoing, but from what we have seen, right, it appears that the alleged offense or offenses run afoul of what is Section 298 of the Penal Code, or at least that was what the allegation is, right, that she violated Section 298. And all I want to say about Section 298, Section 298 is about uttering words and so on with deliberate intent to wound the religious or racial feelings of any person. So it actually reads, and I'll just read the first part of it: whoever with deliberate intention of wounding the religious or racial feelings of any person utters any word, makes any sound in the hearing that person, makes any gesture, and so on, may be liable to this offense, right? Now, the key words here is deliberate intention of wounding. I mean, this is not going to be easy to prove, right? Just from speaking from a strictly legal point of view, if I were going to go to court and prosecute somebody for this, it will be quite a task to show what is in the mind of the person, what is in the so-called guilty mind. Did this person have a deliberate intention to wound, and not just wound any feelings, but religious or racial feelings, right? So you have to be very, very clear. This is what proving the crime requires. So based on what we've seen so far, I think it will be an uphill task for the prosecution, right? But we don't know, right? They may have more stuff. Now, what will happen? I mean, yeah.
Can I just interrupt you to bring in Priscilla again, because as the only practicing lawyer. Although Kevin, you may have talked to her, I don't know, but as the only one practicing law, what do you think of that? Could she be charged? Or what is she?
I think it's really difficult to see where the police, what kind of actions the police might take. But let's say they do charge her and she gets convicted. I think the question would be, would she be disqualified from running and continuing her membership in Parliament? And under the Constitution, there are several conditions where MP becomes disqualified to continue with his or her seat. And one of the disqualification that is relevant for this situation is if she has been convicted of an offense by the Singapore courts, and the sentence is either for a term either of not less than 1 year or a fine of not less than $2,000. So it really depends. We'll just have to watch and see what the police decides as their next course of action.
My own hunch, just based on precedent, is that at worst she would be issued with one of these stern warnings, right? But I'm hoping that the police just let it go, yeah, because I think it was a bit of a stretch in the first place, as Kevin tried to point out. I'm actually personally most heartened by the number of Singaporeans, including the Chinese Singaporeans, who were outraged by the PAP's false statement, where they said that she admitted to making anti-Chinese and anti-Christian statements, which she never did. Right? She attacked what she saw as inequality, an injustice by the system, by the police, and in what she admitted was too heated and extreme a way. But she never did attack Christians or Chinese. And to let this out, to me, was the single most disappointing incident in the entire campaign. I'm just still stunned by it. I wish the PAP had simply retracted it, because it was completely indefensible. But I'm glad in the absence of that, so many Singaporeans actually came out to say, we do not believe this ever happened. So there is that, I think, that instinct among many Singaporeans to protect our racial and religious harmony, which I think does bode well for us. I want to move on to the this question that has been raised even in the course of talking about Raisa, is the supposed generational divide. I say supposed because it is still a hunch. We just feel there's something going on here. Yeah, that the young are responding to the PAP's message in a way that the PAP does not quite get. Would anyone like to take this on? I guess I should start with the two young ones, Elvin and Priscilla. Do you think there is a generational divide that is going to be as significant as, say, the class divide that we used to talk about more? Don't both rush, either Elvin or Priscilla.
So, with regards to the PAP and the youth, I mean, I don't. So, to be honest, I'm not entirely certain about what I'm going to say from now. But my sense is that there is a significant divide between what the youth's political views are and what they desire in the political system and what the PAP is offering. And there's a misalignment there, right? It could be that the young candidates that the PAP is bringing on is not, their views are not being filtered upwards into the party hierarchy fast enough. It could be that the various feedback mechanisms from the young PAP is not filtering up into the party hierarchy fast enough. And it could also be because there's a delay in the leadership transition, right? From the 3G leadership to the 4G leadership. Perhaps in a counterfactual world, if the 4G leadership were to already have taken over, and if they would have to run a different campaign, perhaps the messaging that they're putting across might resonate more with young voters, right? So that could be something that is going on. So there could be various things going on. I think the PAP will have to do quite a bit of self-reflection with regards to their policies and outreach towards the youths.
Priscilla, do you want to add to that?
Well, I think across generations, we all have common goals. We want a better Singapore. We want our country to do well, but I think the differences lie in how we get there. I think for the younger generation, there is a more urgent need. We want immediacy. We want to see change now. We are passionate to see that move towards the type of Singapore that we envision, and we are willing to step forward. We are willing to speak up, and we are willing to walk the talk and support whichever parties that best align with our views. So I think, yes, there are generational divides, and really the challenge is how to accommodate everyone in a single framework with multiple diverse avenues to getting there.
Yeah, and I will also very quickly want to put in a two-finger to one of the opinions that I saw in the chat from Kai, saying that it could be that for the members of the young PAP that the PAP is recruiting, that they may potentially be from a similar pool of young people who are better well off, more higher income youths, who are coming into the young PAP, and therefore they may not be reflective of the views of the whole pool of youth out there. So that could be another potential explanation, which will be interesting to look at. I mean, anecdotally, we know that the youth who participate in and volunteer for the PAP, such as in their Meet the People sessions, they usually come from a little bit more well-off background, I would say, as compared to the median youth, right? So that could be a plausible hypothesis.
So there are several major themes that we wanted to talk about, that our audience also wanted to talk about, and we simply will not get around to discussing, which include what are the implications of this result for the transition to 4G, what's the future of the opposition in terms of opposition cooperation, what do these results say about the GRC system and even the need for the system, considering that the Workers' Party team has 3 minorities, and that once again the senior Indian cabinet minister scores exceptionally high in his GRC. We've not talked about POFMA much, which is another huge innovation in this campaign. So we have to be selective, and I think I'm going to just pick on one theme to end, which has to do with active citizenry, yeah? Because one of our audience members, Fandi Kai, raises this, I think, very important point. What is the role of an active citizen in the periods between elections? Justin Ong asks, no matter what the result, and he was asking this before the results came out, how do we keep the conversation going, for Singaporeans who feel sort of a bit more activated by the election? What next? And how do we keep our elected officials accountable beyond this intense period? And this, I think, is something I particularly feel strongly about, because in my view, and I think Elvin, for example, and many political scientists would agree, the thing about Singapore elections is that they are won before nomination day, right? I mean, the electorate pays attention during the campaign, but by then the game is over. There's so many structural and substantive issues that have been settled long before. And it's only around the margins that we are playing when the time comes. So this idea of keeping scrutiny on the electoral process or staying engaged with, as citizens seems to be crucial. But of course, it is not really in line with Singapore's sort of elite democracy mode of government, where the prevailing idea is that, look, let's leave politics to the professionals. Let's leave policy making to those who are really serious about it. A bit of apathy isn't that bad because it just makes government less messy. So really leave it to the people who know what they're doing. Once every 4 or 5 years, pay attention, decide who you want to delegate the job to for the next 4 or 5 years. And in between, just go and do your work, raise your families, leave politics to us. Yeah. Some of us are not persuaded by that model, right? And we do actually believe in staying involved throughout. Can this be done? Should this be done? And that's going to be my closing question to each of you. Kevin, why don't you go first?
Yes, thanks. I can't agree more with you, Cherian. I think as an educator, I've always believed that it's important, number one, that we need to educate, right? You can't advocate for anything unless you have your facts, right? So you need to educate the voting population. This is extremely important. Now, some people may feel that this is a very dangerous thing, right? Because if you tell people too many things, they know too much about their rights, they know too much about the constitution and so on, they become troublemakers, right? Because they know how to navigate their ways in and out of these things. So I think education is key, right? Without education, without understanding the content of what you are talking about, what you're trying to do, it's very hard to advocate because you may come across as being a little vacuous in that sense. And I think this came up in a debate during the debate which involved Vivian, where somebody actually said, I can't remember if it was Chi or it was James who actually said, look, we don't have a kind of civic education, right? They don't talk about the pledge. I think it was James. He said they don't talk about the pledge, they don't talk about the constitution. And I think one of these problems, of course, is that the government views this kind of education, this kind of talks, discussions, and so on, with a very suspicious eye. I remember once I was actually asked if I was joining the Workers' Party because I appeared at a forum where they invited me to talk about the elected presidency. And they said, well, why do you go to the Workers' Party? And I said, well, if the PAP invited me, I would go to the PAP as well. But nobody does, right? So I'm happy to educate whoever wants to listen to me. But this is just a point to make that we should take this citizenship education very, very important. And don't penalize those who actually embark in this.
Terence?
Yep, thank you. I'm exactly on the same page. I'm an educator too, and things I've been harping on, and some of my colleagues would know about this, is the idea of critical literacy. You can insert media into critical media literacy or critical political literacy. And I think that's in some ways still sorely lacking in the context of Singapore, precisely for the reasons that Kevin has outlined. The government views these things with suspicion. The government wants to have the first and final say to most things. In some ways, and they also tend to try and contrive what active citizenship means in the Singapore context. So, the last, after every election, matter of course, you have a Singapore conversation or whatever term they might call it. And, it's very likely that one will emerge within a year from now, from today. And what happens then is, you feed information in this box, and very little of that translates into outcomes, right? So, or even if it does, we can't actually join the dots to where it originated from. So I think that broadly speaking, the way to become active is for Singaporeans to keep apprised of developments in policies. There's no other way around it. We can't have a shortcut, come back 5 years later and we'll immediately fill you in on what's been happening. And I think that line has been used to criticize particularly opposition members coming in. The same isn't thrown to new candidates that the PAP introduces, usually a few months before the election. So, there's no shortcut to active citizenship. I think people need to apprise themselves of, policy developments and things both at the local as well as the broader national level.
Elvin?
Yeah, I think I would agree with the general sentiments of Terence. As I gradually observed the civil society over the years, I think I can see more and more people, young people, becoming active citizens, right? And they do have an open invitation from DPN Heng Swee Keat, who says that he wants a democracy of deeds in Singapore. So I think the demand for active citizenry and the supply of active citizenry is gradually moving upwards, and that is healthy in Singapore. Of course, people could be more politically educated and informed, but what I see, the missing link is really the onus on the government to not see every deed that a person does as suspicious of intent and out to bring harm to Singapore, right? So I think the government, I think it's on the onus of the government somehow to be more inclusive, more open-minded to the different agendas that people may put up. And that could shift policy into the future, right? Again, I want to point out something that someone said in the chat, that apparently the young PAP had a climate policy paper, and apparently there was a lot of bold proposals and consultation with civic society, but these climate change proposals did not filter up into the party hierarchy and make it to the party manifesto, right? So it already shows that there is a conversation going on, that some things are bubbling up, but it's just not reaching the higher ups, right? So I think the higher ups got to do a little bit more of self-reflection moving forward into the future.
Priscilla?
I think underlying all this question is, one, a sense of frustration as to what we can do, and also I think a lack of information of what we can do besides just volunteering for the parties that we want to see in Parliament or standing for political election itself. But actually there are ways to get directly involved with parliamentary process. So I'm thinking of two main things. Number one, public petitions. If you recall, Mr. Louis Ng did bring a public petition on the issue of single housing for, better housing policies for single parents. So that's one way of getting directly involved. The other way, there are a lot of, before any bill or any legislation is passed, there is a consultation process that is conducted by REACH, where they actually invite the public to make submissions on proposed legislations that might come in force. So one interesting example, I think, was the Films Act in 2018, when they wanted to make amendments to it. The consultation actually did result in the draft bill taking off some tweaks and changes to the draft bill that eventually in the actual bill itself. So there are means and ways to be more actively involved, and I think people are just not doing so only because they don't know where to be looking up for and how to take part in this type of political process.
Well, thank you. And I guess I would add to that. I think many Singaporeans actually overestimate the obstacles in the way, and we should be learning from activists like Priscilla and academics like those gathered here, and many other Singaporeans who actually do find their ways around, admittedly frightening minefields. I mean, they can be intimidating, but there are role models in front of us about how to get this done. Let me end by thanking the audience on behalf of those of us gathered here, and to invite you to continue this conversation, and also, of course, continue reading, yeah, which is the root of a lot of the wisdom and education that we should be arming ourselves with as citizens. So I personally am looking forward a great deal to the book that Kevin and Terence are editing, with writers like Priscilla and Elvin and several others. And you can, of course, join us anytime at Academia.SG to get your fix of slightly dense, but we hope still readable op-eds and many other discussions on issues of the day. The idea behind Academia.SG is to try to connect the academic community with the wider public sphere. Too often in Singapore, they are quite separate, living in their own bubbles. We believe that academics should play a more active role, and that the public and the government should welcome that role. And Academia.SG is part of, it's a small way to make that happen. So support us by signing up for our mailing list. That's all we ask. Stay in touch, and we hope that you have enjoyed this conversation. Have a good weekend. Thank you.